Right then, here we go. Start off with a very pale brown wash, I think. Representing the trunk of a big tree. It's going to be a gum tree, so it'll have bits of bark floating off it, as it were, and it'll have the other gum trees in the background in the nearby region. So now we need to add a dollop of sky. Sounds like a piece of a Scottish island, doesn't it? So let's carefully add in some water. Alright, so let's add some blue to that. Not necessarily very strong blue. Doesn't have to be very even either, because there's going to be a fair amount of foliage going on in and around these trees, but we'll just put the blue in. Everywhere, and if it gets covered over, well, it gets covered over. That's not a big deal. It's not very even, is it? So let's dilute it a bit and see if we can soak some of it up. That's probably better. So this is not the final colour for the trees, but it's probably the final colour for the sky. Maybe I need to add a bit more water on the bottom edge of the sky there. Pick up any brush at the moment to put on water with, because I've just gone and washed a bunch of brushes, so they're all wet. It's kind of convenient. Don't very often wash my watercolour brushes, because watercolour can be reactivated as many times as you like, so it doesn't really matter if the brushes get dry with paint in them, unlike acrylic and oil paints. Something I've probably said before. Strong just there, so let's take that away. So we don't have a very even blue. I wasn't particularly trying for an even blue in the sky. Hopefully a lot of that will be overwhelmed by foliage colours. Not just. I'll try and even that bit out though. Looks a bit pale at the moment. Now, so that's all nice and dry. And the next thing we do is to put some masking fluid down. So this stringy bark that you get on gum trees is going to be, so this is going to be the lightest, what I'm putting the masking fluid on at the moment is going to be the lightest bark, because I'm masking the lightest paint, and the more paint I put on, the darker it will get, of course. So I've got a bit going around there. I just have some sort of limb that's come off, perhaps there, and that. Going over there, and a bit more of something. Let's take it out there, so we'll have more bark colour or something. So these are scrappy trees, so pretty scrappy effect on the of the bark. So we're going to have a branch. We're going to have a path. So organise the path so it's got an edge. And at this point I think we'll dry the masking fluid. Okay, I reckon that's probably dry enough. Got to be terribly careful with masking fluid that it is dry enough, because if you put your, oh there we go, if you put your brush into masking fluid that's not quite dry, you'll ruin your brush. Given that you pay a king's ransom for the brushes, yes, that's all right. You really don't want to do that. All right, so what we're doing now is we're going to apply more water, having carefully dried the thing. So I want the paint to spread evenly across the whole surface, and having the paper wet makes that a lot more likely to happen. If the paper isn't wet, you find that there are areas that just resist the running of the paint. You can see that the paper is you can see that the paper is curling as a result of the the water that's getting into the fibres on this side of the paper, so they're expanding and the other side of the paper is not expanding, consequently it's curling on me, and I hope that I'll be able to put paint on, and I really ought to be doing this over some sort of a basin, but I'm doing it on my sheet, so I'm going to use towels to try and catch the paint that wants to make its way onto the floor. So here we go. Let's have a bit of yellow, maybe some more, a bit of red. So this is me attempting to prevent the paint from disappearing forever onto the carpet. Just a little bit of blue there, a little bit of blue. I'm very sure I picked up enough. And now just encourage it to run in a variety of directions. So we've got all this all these loose areas of paint, and I want them to sort of meld together and not actually form a single unified colour, but to form a background that is the consequence of this uncontrolled, or slightly controlled, ever so slightly controlled, running of the paint colours together. So, given that I'm concentrating on what I'm doing at the moment, I can't really tell can't really watch what you can see, but I guess you'll get the general impression that there's paint moving around on the surface of the paper. And just in one or two places where it wasn't really wet enough, I'm just encouraging it to mix there. It doesn't really matter very much. See, the masking fluid down here is a dam that's preventing the paint from getting through. It's broken through in one point, so we'll let some of that green mess run down along the path, and I might pull the paint over to the edge. You see, this is messing up my hands, but it's not permanent. And maybe just wash a bit of the colour off that path. To differentiate it from the rest. And I think maybe there's a bit much, so I'll spray that. I can get a fine spray out of this bottle if I squeeze really hard on the trigger. So it didn't produce too many big droplets on the surface, which is one of the problems when you use a squeeze bottle, that sometimes the bottle will just produce enormous great fat drops, and they really disrupt the appearance of the paint. Let's try and get this going diagonally rather than vertically. Deal with these places where it's a little bit too dry. Let's spray a bit more water down there. So isn't that pretty? It'll produce a colourful background for the subsequent layers of paint. But of course, before we start applying those, we need to dry it. So right, so now with this extra layer of masking fluid, the second layer of masking fluid, I can do a bit more tree colour. So then we can get on and move on to another layer of just general coloration. So let's put a bit of water down here to make it easy to spread the paint around, and pick up some slightly darker brown than before. And let's make a bit of darker colour in there. Go around these bits of bark that are hanging off the tree, and I've put some fallen off bits of bark on the ground there, and one over there for no particularly good reason. So that will deal with that tree. Now let's put some darker colour on some of these other trees. Alright, that should do for that, and this should be probably more ragged around the edges. Shall we just take some of the hard edge off there. Rightio, so now let's dry things again. And now another layer of wash, multicoloured wash, and I've just realised that I've got rid of all of the blue colour from the sky, so I'll try and skyify that with a bit more blue, which may produce all sorts of greens, obviously, and darker colours over in the corner there. But well, we'll just see what happens, shall we? Water everything. I think I'll also try and leave the path the same colour as it is at the moment. So not allow the wash into that area. Whether I'll succeed in doing that or not is another question, of course. Paint has its own agenda. Alright, so I've got a whole bunch of blue here on the palette. I might as well just dump that on there, since I want to control where the sky is. So that's become quite a dark, dull colour, but it may read as sky if we're lucky. Let's probably suffice, I think. And a bit of blue. Don't have very much on the pipette, but that's all right. And now we're just allowing this multicoloured mess to make its way all over the painting, so it's encourage it to be a bit more mobile by spraying some water. I'm going up towards the edge of that path, but not going over it, so let's be a bit controlling about that, shall we? And let's see if we can get some dark colour down in this corner. Alright. Now the paint is very liquid at the moment, and if I pour it off, we'll get it'll go very pale. It'll go back to almost as pale as it was after the last wash. But if I let it dry, it will form blooms. So I'm going to try to do a bit of drying and a bit of pouring. Maybe at this stage I'll try to introduce some grassy areas. So, I mean, these colours are not going to be real. If I can get any masking fluid out of there at all. These colours are not going to be realistic, but hopefully the shapes will indicate. Oh, I also want some more. Some more variation on this big tree. See what I can do with these grassy areas. Maybe I'll just sort of work in this section of the painting rather than over the entire thing. Well, I have put masking fluid over there, so maybe, I don't know. Try and do the whole thing. Except for the path. Well, that's some very thick, ouch, that's hot, hot as hell. So that's some very thick paint down there. So watercolour painter, well, any painters actually, talk about avoiding mud, meaning muddy colours. This has a sort of muddy appearance. It looks as though it's sort of sitting on the surface as a layer of mud. It's not so much the colour itself, which is still reasonably apparent, but just a not terribly pleasant texture to it. So we'll take off the masking fluid, or shall I try and put the foliage on those trees that I was going to put on. I don't know whether it matters very much whether they're green or not. At this stage we've gone so far away from naturalistic colour that green is almost unnecessary. But well, we'll give it a go. And as I've said on previous occasions, the only goal in life that yellow has is to turn green. So just about anything you add to yellow makes it go green. So we'll put that on. There's foliage in all sorts of places, so I'm putting it all around the place, and a lot of that will probably disappear when it dries. Alright, so let's get back to removing masking fluid, which is just a tedious process. In fact, why don't I turn off the camera and let you rejoin when this is all done. So there we are. All of the masking fluid has been taken off, and I have to say that if you're an aspiring guitarist and you want to harden up the ends of your fingers, then taking masking fluid off watercolour paintings is probably a good way of doing it. This is a lot more abstract than most of my art, and I think it's not unsuccessful, but I do want to emphasise the trunk of this tree a little bit more, so I think I'm going to try to remove some of the paint, particularly from the edges of the trunk, just to make it stand out a little bit from the background. So my usual technique for removing paint, which is to scrub it and rub it, I suppose, is the way to describe it. There we go. So that's one side of the trunk picked out a little bit, just enough maybe to make it clear that there is something there, and we'll do the other side as well. So that's just maybe nearly enough. Doesn't have to be a lot. Maybe we'll have one or two little bits in the middle that follow that general concept, so it's not entirely on the edges. But kind of the opposite of the usual chiaroscuro way of indicating three-dimensionality, which is to darken the outside edges of things so that where they fold away from you, there's less light on them, but I'm kind of doing the opposite here, of making the outside edge lighter, as though it's catching light rather than shading away. So maybe that just about does enough to maybe a bit more down there. Yeah, I think that's enough. So I'm going to put this on display for a little while from a distance, so that I can see what I think about it. And well, if I need to make any more changes, then I'll come back and do them, and you can see me doing that. I might wonder about putting some foliage in that covers some of these branches, so there's still a bit of greenish paint on the brush here. Maybe enough to obscure the branches, as I was hoping. So let's put a bit more dark paint on. There we go. Because foliage doesn't only exist at the tops of trees, let's put in some further down as well. So all that work to mask out those areas, and now I'm painting over them. Seems such a waste, doesn't it? Alright, I think that might do. So as I say, I'll just stick this up on display and see what I think.